Hi everyone, my name is Colin Sahin, and I am here to share my aha moments throughout my learning of ethnic studies. This field has not only deepened my understanding of systemic inequalities, but has also empowered me to think critically about social justice and advocacies. Today, I will be identifying three important concepts, theories, topics, or ideas that I learned while taking this class, or to put it differently, what were my aha moments during this quarter. I will describe concepts and explain why I believe these concepts, theories, or ideas are important. What do I find most interesting? How has my thinking changed as a result of these concepts, theories, or ideas? And how will I apply this knowledge to my life, major, or career? And currently, I am also pursuing a career in healthcare. So, yeah. So, starting off in Victor Rios's essay, The Consequences of Criminal Justice Pipeline on Black and Latino Masculinity, it gave me a new understanding of just how systemic inequalities can harm Black and Latino youth. He explains the term cumulative disadvantage, and what this means is how inequality grows at every stage of the criminal justice process, from arrest to incarceration. This isn't due to isolated events, but results from a deep systemic biases. Rios also discusses how hypermasculinity, a tough, aggressive persona, develops a survival mechanism in response to constant criminalizations. For example, when the police insult young men by calling them names like quote unquote little bitches, it challenges their sense of dignity, pushing them to act hard to regain control. Sadly, this behavior often draws them further into the injustice system. What stood out to me most was how the same systems meant to reform these young men often make the problem worse by reinforcing behaviors they aim to eliminate. I used to think hypermasculinity was a cultural or personal issue, but Rios's research helped me see it as a response to the systemic oppression. The criminal justice system doesn't just punish, it shapes hypermasculinity through the constant surveillance, stigma, and humiliation. This means that hypermasculinity isn't an inherent trait of communities, but a symptom of broader systemic failures. Addressing it requires changing those systems, not blaming the individuals. Um, as I pursue a career in healthcare, this insight will also guide how I approach marginalized patients. I'll recognize the behaviors like aggression or distrust that may stem from trauma caused by systemic injustice. By building trust, listening without judgment, and creating a safe space, respectful environment, I can help address not only medical needs to others, but also the social and psychological challenges people face. In this United States is not a nation of immigrants by Dunbar Ortiz. This challenges the common belief that the U.S. is a welcoming, quote unquote, nation of immigrants. Instead, the author reveals that the U.S. was built on settler colonialism, taking land from indigenous peoples, displacing them, and erasing their existence. The narrative of the U.S. as a land of opportunity and inclusion distracts from the country's violent history and ongoing harm to indigenous communities. My biggest realization was understanding how this idealized story of immigration hides the struggles of indigenous people and their continued fight for land and sovereignty. This concept is important because it uncovers the hidden truth about U.S. history. While the nation of immigrants narrative might seem positive, it overshadows the violence and displacement that allowed the U.S. to grow. Multiculturalism, often seen as a progressive idea, can also erase indigenous histories by focusing on how immigrant groups contributed to the U.S. rather than addressing the harm done to indigenous people. What stood out most was how ideas that seem inconclusive, like celebrating diversity, can actually make indigenous struggles invisible, replacing their reality with a false narrative of unity. This understanding has changed how I view immigration and the racial justice because I used to think of immigration as a story of opportunity and resistance to racism, with little connection to indigenous issues. Now I see how immigration can sometimes reinforce systems like settler colonialism by ignoring the harm done to these indigenous people. The realization has shown me that racial justice, immigrant rights, and indigenous sovereignty are all deeply connected together. And we really must adjust them together to create true equality and justice. Additionally, to advocate for better access to healthcare in undeserved communities, supporting policies that will improve services for Indigenous people and ensure immigrants can seek care without a fear of deportation, um, by acknowledging the historic and systemic barriers these communities face. I hope to create a healthcare environment that prioritizes equality, respect, and justice for all. In Patrick Wolfe's Settler Colonialism and Elimination of the Narrative, I had a key realization. Settler colonialism is not a one time event, but an ongoing structure. Wolfe's concept of logic of elimination highlights how settler societies continuously erase indigenous presence, not just through violence, but also through forced assimilation, renaming lands, and redefining indigenous identities, such as blood quantum requirements. These strategies enable settlers to maintain control over land and reinforce colonial dominance indefinitely. This concept is crucial because it reframes the colonialization as a continuing process that still impacts indigenous people today. It reveals how policies appear to begin, such as citizenship or education initiatives, often serve to erase indigenous identities and cultures. What struck me the most was how this elimination isn't always violent, but operates subtly through systemic and cultural means, perpetualizing marginalization under the guise of process. Learning this shifted my perspective on colonization. I previously thought it would ended with a legal recognition of indigenous rights, but I understand that colonial structures persist in systems that prioritize settlers' needs while undermining indigenous sovereignty and culture. This has deepened my understanding of the justice and systemic barriers indigenous communities face. This understanding reminds me that healthcare is also deeply connected to the social justice by acknowledging the systemic impacts of colonialization. I aim to improve care that not only heals but also empowers the indigenous community, contributing to dismantling of the colonial systems rather.